time to wake to sleep with Sleep Science Today, where we learn to sleep well with your host, Andrew Colsky on UK Health Radio.
Hello there, Andrew Colsky from Sleep Science Today. And today we're going to be talking about melatonin and its effects on sleep and how we even measure that. We've got a guest, Steve Granger. He is the Chief Scientific Officer at Salimetrics. So Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, we're really excited for this because we talk a lot about melatonin in terms of supplements, and we talk about people's sleep schedules and maybe even circadian rhythm disorders, but we never really have had an opportunity to talk about how do we measure melatonin? How do we know what's going on? So can you give us a little bit of background in terms of what is Salimetrics as a company? What do you do? How do you do it? Give us some background.
Sure, absolutely. Salimetrics has been around for quite a while. You know, we're over 25 years old. We are really focused on making assays for measuring molecules in saliva, and we literally make them from scratch and then manufacture them and sell them mostly to the research community. We do have some assays that are 510K cleared for CLIA type assessments. But in this case, for melatonin, we've built it from scratch knowing there was a need for a better assay at the time. And we literally started from antibody generation all the way through. And that's very similar to what we do at Salimetrics. Saliva is very complicated. And if you think about what saliva really does for your body, mucins in saliva coat food, so you can sleep, you can eat the food, right? You can swallow it. So if you're making an assay and there's a lot of mucins in that sample, those mucins will coat your antibodies and coat the components of your assay. So we've had to be very creative about not only making antibodies that are very specific, but also working with different diluents and different buffers to combat this interference of what we call the matrix. So we make these kits, we sell them. We also have two testing facilities. One is a CLIA laboratory, and then another facility that does a lot of research testing. So as you would imagine, saliva is a really convenient sample to provide information to researchers when they're studying children or biobehavioral aspects of life. And so lots of publications from researchers using our kits. I think we're at like 10,000 papers from Salimetrics.
Oh, wow.
So been in the business forever, and we're very, very excited about the potential. And melatonin measurements really are one of the first clinical applications that's really taking hold, and it really is honestly better than blood for melatonin profiling.
So can you tell us then, so sleep science itself, sleep medicine itself is relatively new. So, 1970s is sort of the starting end of sleep medicine. When did you all realize that there was a need for this type of a test for melatonin? How did you get into that? Why does Salimetrics even focus on anything related to sleep?
That is a really good question. So we're always kind of looking for the next thing, but we were looking 15 years ago. So at the time, the technology to make rabbit hybridomas was evolving. So we made rabbit hybridomas, so rabbit monoclonal antibodies, and really focused on building this melatonin assay because we talked to a lot of people basically, and it seemed like there was a need for a better way to measure melatonin in saliva. And what we did is, we're talking to sleep physiologists and the medical community, and people going into sleep centers and taking blood draws just seemed like it was a very, very prohibitive task. People just would avoid it. And talking to people at meetings, they all were really excited about having something where collection could be done at home and the measurements just needed to be better. And so it wasn't novel. The people had already really looked at saliva and melatonin and had already been convinced that the serum saliva correlation was very high. So the numbers coming out of saliva, meant a lot already. And what people were using was radio immunoassay, and we built something that that everybody could use, that didn't require any special machinery, and it was a little bit more open to people that are doing research, but also for labs like ourselves.
So basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, it is possible to measure melatonin in someone's body through their blood, just like it's possible to measure through their saliva, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And so what the blood requires is, someone there taking samples. And the part about melatonin that we'll get into as we chat is it really changes minute by minute through the day and then into the night. And so one sample really doesn't adequately assess what's happening with your body. And melatonin really being one of these central drivers of your circadian biology, it really requires a good 5 to 9 samples, and in some cases people will sample every 15 minutes. So you have to deal with a blood draw or some kind of cannulation, or you're in a lab, and it really is one of these molecules that just illustrates the power of saliva. You can sample painlessly at home. The sample's pretty stable, and then when you do these profiles, you get these beautiful curves, and it just gives you that feeling like, wow, this never would have been able to be done with a single sample.
So I realize that, yes, you're saying this can be done in the lab, but you're also saying it can be done at home. And I'm guessing then in reality what that looks like is somebody would give you like saliva samples, like spitting into a bottle at different times of the day. Is that what it's all about?
Yeah, that's what we do. And I can show you the kit that we have. We have small tubes, and it only takes a small amount of saliva per sample, about a 0.5 milliliter. And so you set a timer, and it's important to track the time. But what our test does is you take a sleep diary for a week and make sure and try to pin down your bedtime. And then we have really clear instructions about when to start collecting, and you count backwards from bedtime. So 7 to 9 samples per hour, each hour. And so you usually start right about after dinner and then all the way 1 hour past bedtime. And I do a lot of this stuff because what happens is when you sample and get those measurements, we plot those curves, and it gives you this baseline, which is very important. So daytime, you really have very low melatonin, and then you calculate something called the dim light melatonin onset. And so otherwise known as DILMO.
Okay.
And that is the time on the clock when your melatonin has significantly risen above baseline. So it's either a statistical number based on 3 baseline points, or it's a threshold where you're above a certain value. And we calculate it both ways. And then that profile continues to go on until past bedtime, and you should see this nice high peak at bedtime. So daytime flat, a nice onset, and then it rises to a nice peak. And if you're healthy, if you're young, it'll be really smooth and beautiful, and it's very predictive. DILMO will be very, very consistent. We have a person here we've done 50 DILMOs on, and he's our test pilot. He's Chris Schwartz. If you call here, you talk to him. He is literally our test pilot, and what's really fun is we can say, how consistent is DILMO? And he'll be on the phone with people and say, I've done mine 50 times, and it literally is very, very consistent. So it allows you to kind of get this confidence of, all right, I'm getting a real good snapshot of what's happening in this. This is circadian hormones onset. We also do offset. So there's DIL-MO, but there's also DIL-MOF. So in the morning you wake up and you do the same type of profiling, and you can see how high your melatonin is at wake, and then how fast it drops during the day. Mm-hmm. There's also people that do 24-hour sampling, which is very challenging, and Chris also has done that a bunch, and he doesn't like it at all, but it's very informative. It gives you more of a full 24-hour picture of what's happening. So you get this daytime flatness, a nice onset, and then it comes down in the morning. And a lot of the timing is related to your chronotype. So you can get some information about people if they're self-reporting having a real hard time getting out of bed, and they're groggy. Their offset can just be extended really far. And melatonin is exquisitely sensitive to light exposure. So being a circadian hormone, it's in tune with the daylight cycle, and then that allows you to have a sleep-wake cycle that's entrained. So if you wake up in the morning and go out in the sun, your stimulation of your not to get into the physiology, but the molecules in the back of your eyes will signal to stop production, and that's very wavelength specific. So sunlight has a specific spectrum of wavelength, and so when you're waking up in the morning, if you don't get out in the sun, sometimes your melatonin doesn't necessarily offset normally. If you're not in the sun during the day, believe it or not, it can also affect how high your peak goes. So there's some really interesting interactions with your natural environment that has been entrained, and we've evolved to have these systems helping us go to sleep. It doesn't necessarily induce sleep, but it's a sleep regulator. And then there's other molecules like cortisol that are basically on the opposite side of the fence. Cortisol spikes in the morning when melatonin's coming down, and it mobilizes glucose. It's part of your HPA, adrenal response. That glucose helps you wake, and then it wanes, and then at bedtime it should be very low. So you see these very classic plots of melatonin going up at night, cortisol being low. You wake, cortisol spikes, and melatonin goes down. And so those plots are really relevant because within those samples we collect for melatonin, we can also test for cortisol.
Wow.
So, and the benefit of that is I'm going to sleep, my melatonin is blunted, and I have a huge spike of cortisol. So you basically have an awakening response when you're trying to go to sleep. And we've seen that quite a bit. And that's basically a hallmark of poor sleep hygiene, but also poor stress management.
Wow.
People oftentimes will have their social cues to manage stress during the day, and then they lay in bed and roll around and ruminate, and their cortisol can kind of crank up into the sky. So that's a lot of background about that. But so the natural physiology that we're really excited about, again, is this multiple sample profile. And what that DIL-MO, the time on the clock when you see this onset, allows you to do is figure out if you have a phase shift in your circadian driver, melatonin.
Right.
And some people have different circadian sleep disorders. And when you're going to bed, and then when that DIL-MO happens, that time is something called phase angle. So it should be around 1 to 5 hours. And that's been, bandied about in the literature, and depending on who you talk to, people have very strong opinions about that. But what we found is bedtime varies quite a lot in people. And so if melatonin onset is very consistent, and people are talking about a normal phase angle that's variable, we feel like the bedtime is what's really varying in these calculations. And if you could go to bed at an exact time every single night, which is almost impossible in this society, then about 2 hours is optimal.
Right.
between onset and bedtime.
Great.
What some physicians are using Domo for is to predict when your body's ready to go to bed. So
let me
Domo and then say, hey, if your Domo is 8, you should probably go to bed at 10.
Right. Well, let me stop you there for 1 second because I've got to take a commercial break. But
Great.
Let's take a break. We'll come right back and we'll pick up where we left off. This is Sleep Science Today. We'll be right back with Steve Granger. You're watching Sleep Science Today. If you enjoy our show, please help support us by pressing the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell. It'll really help us get seen, and it'll help you stay informed. All right, Sleep Science Today. I'm your host, Andrew Colsky. We're talking with Steve Granger about melatonin and its impact on our sleep. Let me just summarize one thing and tell me if I'm getting this right, Steve. So basically, on what you're saying, that the melatonin in our body during the daylight, so let's say the highest part of the daylight is going to be low melatonin, right? As the sun starts to shift towards darkness, the melatonin in our body starts to increase, and that's the thing that tells our body that we're getting close to that time that we should be sleeping, right? And sometimes people have a circadian rhythm disorder, which could be advanced phase, delayed phase, meaning that something's not matching up right. And then that's where these tests come into play. Am I getting all this right?
Absolutely. And that's kind of the textbook utility of Domo, is to really see if you've got an advanced or a delayed sleep phase. And it's DSPD or ASPD is what a lot of people will refer that to. And so that, I think what happens is in a lot of cases for physicians is they have a lot of different other measurements. They've got actigraphy and wearables and self-report, and people are saying, hey, I can't sleep, I have this issue, I have that issue. But what the profile allows them to do is rule in or rule out if there is a phase shift in their melatonin profile. So it's this kind of circadian phase test. And then within that context, there's all these other little subtle things you can learn. And a big challenge for us now is working with physicians to try to define really like guidelines for clinical practice in this case. We've done about 1,500 of these, and we have all the data, and we have approval to share it with the key opinion leaders in the field, and we've engaged with a lot of them. And I think what is coming next is some committees and some discussion about how well this assessment predicts certain conditions, and then what kinds of interventions are effective. And I just don't feel like we're talking about a diagnostic. We're talking about something that is an assessment that is used in conjunction with these other things I mentioned. And then what we've also found is these really unique cases where we call each patient if something looks abnormal. This is an at-home collection, so adherence to protocol is really important. And if something looks abnormal, we oftentimes will engage with people and say, okay, were you in dim light, and did you follow was there some kind of exception in this case? And in one case, there was a person that had a nice onset, but then their melatonin just skyrocketed off the charts. And we thought maybe something was broken. As we were launching this, we're always kind of wondering and evaluating critically whether the assay is working well or what's happening. Turned out, she had taken a handful of her medications that, people are oftentimes on many. And so that kind of raised a red flag. It was relatively right after she had taken her meds. The list of meds we're not physicians, so we didn't really necessarily understand all the physiology. But at the exact same time, I'm trying to stabilize melatonin in the lab. So
Right.
again, I'm the science guy. And so I get a list of these molecules that inhibit the enzyme that degrades melatonin. and there's maybe 5 or 6 of them. Well, one of them turns out to be an antidepressant. And so what we found is there's in the literature, in blood literature, that if you take this molecule, this medication, it will profoundly inhibit that enzyme, and then what happens is melatonin just accumulates and goes through the roof. One of the side effects of this drug is grogginess, sleepiness, whatever, the kind of textbook melatonin effects, you would call them.
Right.
Again, this is something that it's anecdotal. We talked to the person, they said, oh my gosh, that makes sense if that's real, but we don't, we're not publishing this or talking to tons of people about it. It's more of interest to a person to say, well, maybe I should time my medications with that in mind.
Right.
And, if they're having a hard time getting out of bed, and in our profile we do a dim off, an offset, and melatonin sky high, and they are not taking melatonin, then it may be beneficial to take the meds at maybe at a different time. So that's kind of one example of some of the things we see. We see a lot of times very jagged profiles for people that have really severe disruption in their sleep, and sometimes they'll just have a real hard time going to sleep, staying asleep, and those jagged profiles are the challenge at this point. Like really trying to get more information about what those mean, and we're very confident in the aspect of the assay where we say, is that real? Is it really working? So Chris, our test pilot, has shined light in his eyes, and we've seen it drop. He's eaten tons of different foods that have melatonin in them. He's, drank alcohol. We basically push and pull him to the degree where we're very confident that we're seeing what we're really seeing. And he's actually even shifted himself and then shifted himself backwards as like a jet lag simulation.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's been a learning experience, but we're excited to kind of move to that next phase where we can get more teeth in some of the physicians' outcomes. And
right. Well, let me ask this then. So, with the various testing you've done, does it look like to you, based on the results you've seen? So, like you said, eating foods that have more melatonin and things like that. I know people will take melatonin supplements that they buy in the drugstore and all. Do those work? Do those make a change? Do you see that? Like, have you ever tested someone on nothing and then they took a melatonin supplement? Did you see a spike? Like, what happens?
Yes, we have, and it rises really quickly. That was another thing we did with Chris, is he doesn't take melatonin. We had him take it, and within about a half hour, 45 minutes, you see the rise. We also had another woman that had a very similar profile as a person that took the antidepressants, and in her notes at the bottom it said, drank glass of tart cherry juice at this time. And so you could see the spike of melatonin right after she drank this juice, and then it came down nicely, and then she had a normal onset. So it was kind of around dinner. What we're seeing, which is really interesting to a lot of people, is the supplements really they're sustained in your system, or at least your melatonin levels go high and stay higher than you would predict based on its half-life. So if we talk about this person with the tart cherry juice, she drank it, it spiked, and it came down in this beautiful, nice, linear, slow drop. And it was, we think, before her onset. So then she had a nice onset, and she seemed normal. The people that will take it, and when Chris takes it, it will go high, and then it'll stay high. It will come down the next day, but if you take it the next day, then it'll stay high for days after that. And so there's something physiologically going on there that is a little bit of a mystery for us, and I think we'll reach out to some experts about this, and we should hopefully be able to get some answers about really what's happening, it seems almost like the endogenous production is hijacked because this, or the levels are just so high. Maybe the supplements aren't accurate, and I know that's another thing. But it's something that for adults, you kind of have your vices. You drink coffee. If I have melatonin in my system all day the next day, I kind of deal. But for kids, it could be a really serious issue in the future. People really don't understand all the physiologic consequences of taking melatonin in developing youth. And our pediatrician says take it on a trip, give it to your kids, and it's safe. And I think if you do that for a couple of days, I agree. But if someone's chronically or habitually on melatonin, and you're little, I think this test really does give parents some insights about, okay, what is it that's happening physiologically with my kids, especially because it's such a profound regulator of your circadian biology. And so
right.
You have something in your system all the time that's supposed to be low and then high and then low and then high. So that's another thing that was of interest, trying to get people to understand this, but then also get the masses to say, wow, this is interesting, I'd like to try it. So we have a website called thebiologyofsleep.com, so it's separate from Salimetrics.
Okay.
And there's a portal for healthcare providers and also for individuals. So it could be direct to consumer. You could say, hey, I'm going to do a Domo. I'm going to buy it. It's going to come to my house, and it has all the instructions, and the report comes right back to you, and it can be independent of your healthcare provider, or it can be done through a healthcare provider. They also will get the report, and then you can have a consult with them and use that as another tool to figure out what is happening with your physiology. So
right.
Would you like to see one of the kits? I think I have a sample.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see what does it look like? How big is it? How scary is it?
So it's this little box.
Okay.
Table. On the back is a pre-addressed envelope,
Mailing label.
a little mailer. So when this comes to you and you're done, you just put this in the mail and it comes directly to us.
Okay.
But what it has is inside, it has instructions, but then also labeled files, and each one of these represents a sample that you would take each hour.
Okay, so these are just for the radio audience. These are just little plastic vials, maybe 2 inch tall or something.
Yeah, they're little guys. So you put about a 1/2 mil in each one. We have these little collection devices that look like little straws, so it allows you to put the saliva in there. And then they go in this little. This guy goes in your freezer, so it's like
a little
plastic
canister,
purpose. And it comes to us frozen, so the samples are all, the integrity of the samples have all been tested, and we've done a lot of, shipping simulations and, really extreme temperature work, and shown that the melatonin is stable in that device. Mm-hmm. So it's gotten to the point where people have used this, and then, let's say I think there's probably a couple hundred physicians using it, but there are a couple people that are super users. They will, as soon as someone comes into their sleep clinic, they say, okay, do this first and then let's talk.
Right.
So the barrier really is more for individual practitioners that don't understand what we're offering. And people that really understand the physiology are really excited. Every meeting we go to, they're just really excited about giving us feedback, and it's been well received. The cost is out of pocket, so we feel like that's actually a good thing, because then people do the assay right.
Right.
So it's like $189, and that's just enough to hurt your wallet, so that when it comes, you do it and you pay attention. And so we do have a CPT code. It's covered by some insurance carriers, but I would rather it not all be completely covered, just so that people have some skin in the game.
Right.
And
Well, let me stop you here again for 1 second, because I've got to take another break. But let me take the break. We'll come right back and pick up where we're leaving off. 1 minute. You're watching Sleep Science Today. If you enjoy our show, please help support us by pressing the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell. It'll really help us get seen, and it'll help you stay informed. Okay, we're back on Sleep Science Today. I'm your host, Andrew Colsky. We're talking with Steve Granger, and we're talking about the cost of tests.
Yeah, so if you go to our website, if you are just interested in trying it, the fun thing about this is we've all done it here at the lab, and it's so painless, and it provides interesting information to you, even if if you're not having huge sleep issues, or if you are and you aren't seeing a physician, you can do it yourself. So it's $189, and it has a portal where there's lots of information where you can learn about the profile. There's a hotline where you can call us and chat about your data. The addition of cortisol is certainly there. You can just check a box and do cortisol in those same samples. The thing that I like to tell people to do is get very comfortable and set your TV far enough, or your chair far enough away from the TV, and stream your favorite Netflix shows for the evening. Tell your family to go away, right? And then, so you can get a break from your normal nightly routine.
Right.
And then, so here's another really interesting thing is that melatonin is programmed in your body based on like the environmental interaction with the light and things, right? So if you're in the darkness, your melatonin will fire based on the previous days of exposure. So we really, and the community says you need to be in a low lux environment. You want to have it be dim light so that it doesn't perturb the production, which is very solid. Some people debate that you almost need two. So you can find out when your natural onset is, but you can also find out what the influence of your nightly habits are. So if you're on your Kindle or on your phone or on something in bed before bed, you can take samples and see if that's preventing your melatonin onset, or at least not getting to the right peak, or
Wow.
So there's kind of two faces to that. And part of the story that was interesting to us about that second part is like assessing your environment is, we talked about daylight inhibiting melatonin. Well, a lot of incandescent light has the same wavelength. It's blue light. It also inhibits your melatonin. So that's kind of why these screens and interactions with bright light in the house can inhibit melatonin. Well, if you go camping, there was a really great paper a while ago from Kenneth Wright's lab where they went camping as a group and didn't have any outside light sources, and they all got really well and trained in about 4 days. And just from my own experience, when you go camping, oftentimes the sun will go down and you get tired way earlier than you normally would at home. And
Right.
The sun goes, and let's say it's 8 o'clock and you want to go to bed.
Yeah.
And that's reflective of a natural onset with the outside light. And there are times when you're home that you can pass that point. You're watching a movie, it's maybe kind of boring, and you're dozing off. You push through that point, and all of a sudden you're wide awake again. And we feel like there's this kind of window of kind of receptive. The sensing of the melatonin in your system is at peak, and that's when people should try to go to sleep if they want to go to bed and they're having troubles. And so if they pass that point, then their cortisol could kick in, and let's say it's a thriller or something. So if you're really really trying to get better sleep and try to sleep at the same time every night, paying attention to, if you have a DILMO number, you can say, all right, 2 hours later, that's when I'm going to be in bed ready to go. So that kind of feeling of entrainment and being out of sync is also interesting to think about. And the thing that illustrates that is jet lag. So I went to Germany a couple months ago to talk at a meeting, and I was just completely blown away at how ruined I was. My digestive system was strange. I up in the middle of the night and thinking about my talk, and then, tired during the day, and just from being several, time zones off. And as I'm there, I'm starting, I'm out in the sun, I'm starting to adjust. And so technically that's like a perfect illustration of a sleep phase disorder and what it feels like to be dysregulated or out of sync. And what's happening in society is, bedtimes during the week are oftentimes different than bedtimes during the weekend, especially if you're younger. And there's something called social jet lag. And literally you can have your bedtime shifted enough on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, let's say it's a Monday Night Football or something like that, where you've got several days where you're shifted later. That can really affect how you feel during the days that you're trying to perform at a normal level during, work days and things. And we've played around with our test pilot, Chris, and on the weekends, he'll stay up really late. And then what we've seen is his DILMO won't completely shift just from 2 nights. But he'll start feeling kind of the effects of staying up late because it's harder for him to go to bed earlier on the Monday, but then he shifts back. And what we feel is there's people that have very different sensitivities to this. You can talk to people about jet lag, and some people will say, it doesn't really affect me that much. And other people will say, oh my gosh, it's awful. And so we feel there's kind of different light sensitivities. We don't feel, but that's kind of something in the literature where everybody has different light sensitivities. And there's also a different kind of response to melatonin levels that are related to age and also related to your physiology. So having these profiles, if you're having sleep issues, but also just to try to get better sleep, to be healthier, it really is of interest to us to try to get this to the mainstream.
Right. Let me ask one question that I'm curious about. Have you done any measurements related to, so you've got someone who says, I've got insomnia, it's really hard for me to get to sleep. And you say, well, what time do you go to bed? Oh, I go to bed at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., whatever it may be. Is that person going to show, if they were to do a test, would they have low melatonin at the time that they're having trouble going to sleep? Or are they just too unrelated? They may have a regular amount of melatonin, but there's something else going on.
We've seen kind of both. So we've seen people with very, very blunted melatonin. And a lot of times it's like what I was referring to as sleep hygiene. So, lots of exposure to light and, maybe working and engaging in kind of stressful activities, whatever, right before bed. Eating, like timing of food is really important. If you eat a lot of carbohydrates right before bed, your metabolic kind of activity during the night will keep you from going to sleep and will wake you up. And, a lot of insulin interactions happening there. And then it can be like this cortisol response where it just overrides everything. Your anxiety and your stress kind of just drives you into a state where you're more active mentally. So it can be blunted. You can have normal and then have these other things happening. I feel like knowing your habit and knowing what is happening on those days when you see a blunted response, or if you see a normal one and you see a cortisol, just allows you to self-reflect and then change some of those behaviors to optimize. And again, since these things are so exquisitely sensitive, you can change your profile in a day. If you're well, maybe not a day. It's pretty quickly responsive. You can blunt it in minutes by shining light in your eyes or doing other things, but to try to maximize your peak takes a little while of more, morning light and exposure to light during the day, and light exercise, and then adhering to kind of all these things that are in that wellness category. Ideally, so what we're hoping is that when sleep physicians use our profiles, that they're their recommendations are more behavioral. We're not really looking to try to have a diagnostic that will bring more drugs on board. It's more eliminating some of these like if you sleep better, you may actually not necessarily need some of the other drugs that are related to how you feel. But also being aware of the effects of some of the behaviors that negatively impact melatonin. So,
Right.
That's kind of what we're hoping and what people are excited about that we talk to at meetings. And there are some very good published reports where Dilmo's been studied, and so there's a ton of literature that supports this type of work. And what we have that's unique is just we have done the exact same methodology for 1,500 individuals. A lot of those studies will be smaller, and we've basically done a trial, and so putting all that data together will be really neat, and trying to see the impact of how how the experts view what's happening. And since this launch, so we've been doing this for several years, and we've realized that there's some benefit of looking at molecules in saliva at strategic times. So a wake sample and a bedtime sample tell you a lot.
Right.
And a midday sample can tell you a lot. So we've also launched another site called healthgps.co, and that is that's an offering that's very similar to these profiles. The collection kit looks the same, but we're measuring drivers of stress, which is cortisol, drivers of sleep, which is melatonin, but also insulin for metabolic health. And we're going to add CRP for inflammation. So we'll get kind of a barometer and an assessment about kind of where you are physiologically, and we can help people on the journey to better health by doing that. So
Wow.
It's evolving essentially as we go. The home health industry really has started taking off. It took off with COVID, and when samples can be collected and the value of the saliva measurement is valuable by itself, I think that's kind of where it's gotten really exciting. People aren't saying, well, what does that mean? Let's convert that to a blood level. Salivary melatonin on its own has ranges, and we can interpret the data by itself. Insulin, we're working on that, and cortisol has been used forever. We made the first 510K submitted assay for cortisol for Cushing's back in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, something.
Right.
So, anyway, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, this is all really incredibly interesting information, and unfortunately, we're out of time. But just knowing that this type of testing is out there, and the facts that you're sharing of the stories of what you're able to see, and use that information in terms of timing, like you were saying, timing of food, timing of sleep, medication, the whole deal. So, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to be on. So I want to get the websites right again. You had the biologyofsleep.com, you had healthgps.co, and people, if they wanted to come and order the kit, they would do that where?
Yeah, right at those websites.
At those sites.
You can go right through those portals, learn information, and then order the kits. So far, we're for Dilmo, it's for healthcare providers and for direct-to-consumer. For the other offering, we're working on kind of B2B or business-to-business. The website is built that way, but it's also direct-to-consumer. You can order it there. So we'll probably add a couple more tests to that, just to kind of complete out some of the interesting metrics that help people in that journey towards wellness. So.
Excellent. Well, I got to cut us off because we're over time here, but Steve Granger from Salimetrics, thank you so much for taking the time to explain all this to us, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the field. It's very important, and as sleep science continues to grow and evolve, you're right there with it, so thank you.
Oh, you're really welcome. Thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the discussion, and hope to stay in touch.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Sleep Science Today and learning how to sleep better with your host, Andrew Colsky, on UK Health Radio. For more information on how you can achieve better sleep, go to sleepsciencetoday.com. Remember, sleep science today and sleep better tonight.